When the Galactic Dominion's most elite diplomatic team finally decided to make contact with humanity, they really thought they had their intimidation game figured out. After all, they'd successfully terrified over 3,000 different species across 17 galaxies. What could possibly go wrong with one little backwater planet called Earth? Commander Vex'thor stood at the bridge of the Dreadnought Obliterator, adjusting his ceremonial battle spikes and practicing his most menacing glare in the reflection of his command console. At 7 feet tall, with mottled green skin and what he considered to be terrifyingly sharp teeth, Vex'thor was the Dominion's go-to guy for making lesser species wet themselves in fear. His crew was equally impressive. Sub-Commander Krill with his 12 writhing tentacles, Technical Officer Qrix who could literally breathe fire, and Battle Specialist Thunk, whose idea of diplomacy involved crushing things with his 4 massive arms. They were, by every metric the Dominion used, absolutely terrifying. The ship descended through Earth's atmosphere with all the dramatic flair they could muster. Ominous red lights flashed, the hull glowed menacingly, and their approach created sonic booms that rattled windows across 3 continents. This was their standard opening move, designed to strike fear into the hearts of primitive civilizations before they even landed. When they finally touched down in what humans called Central Park, Vex'thor and his elite team emerged from their ship with practiced, intimidating precision. Vex'thor's battle spikes gleamed in the sunlight, Krill's tentacles writhed ominously, Qrix small puffs of flame for effect, and Thunk cracked his massive knuckles with sounds like breaking concrete. The humans who had gathered to witness first contact took one look at them and burst into uncontrollable laughter. Not the terrified screaming Vex'thor was used to, not even the respectful silence that sometimes preceded complete surrender. Just pure, uninhibited, doubled-over can't-breathe laughter. One small human child pointed at Krill and shouted, "Mummy, look, it's like an angry octopus," before dissolving into giggles. An elderly woman with a camera snapped photos while chuckling, "Oh my goodness, they look like the vegetables in my garden when I forget to water them for a week." Vex'thor stood there, his carefully practiced intimidation pose suddenly feeling ridiculous as hundreds of humans laughed, pointed, and pulled out small rectangular devices to record them. This had never happened before, ever. In 3,000 successful intimidations across 17 galaxies, not once had anyone laughed at the elite diplomatic team of the Galactic Dominion. Sub-Commander Krill's tentacles drooped in confusion. "Commander," he whispered, "are they experiencing some sort of neurological breakdown? Should we wait for the fear response to kick in?" Technical Officer Qrix stopped breathing fire and looked around nervously. Maybe their species processes terror differently. Perhaps the laughter is how they express mortal dread. Battle Specialist Thunk, who had been mid-knuckle crack, slowly lowered his arms. "I don't think they're afraid of us, sir." Commander Vex'thor watched as more humans arrived, drawn by the commotion and the laughter. Hughes helicopters circled overhead, and he could see humans inside them also laughing as they filmed his supposedly terrifying crew. For the first time in his long military career, Commander Vex'thor was completely, utterly stumped. The Dominion's most feared diplomatic team had just been upstaged by a bunch of giggling primitives who thought they looked like angry vegetables. This was going to require a complete revision of their intimidation protocols. What followed was perhaps the most awkward first contact in galactic history. The Dominion's standard intimidation protocol called for a demonstration of superior technology, followed by demands for immediate surrender, followed by the inevitable cowering and treaty signing. Instead, Vex'thor found himself standing in what humans called the United Nations building, trying to look menacing while a room full of diplomats struggled not to snicker. "Greetings, primitive humans," Vex'thor began, his voice amplified by his suit speakers to create maximum intimidation effect. "We are the representatives of the Galactic Dominion, rulers of 3,000 worlds across 17 galaxies. We have come to inform you that your pathetic species will now submit to our supreme authority or face the consequences of our terrible wrath." The human diplomat assigned to handle first contact, a middle-aged man named Jake Morrison, pressed his lips together so hard they turned white. His shoulders shook slightly as he fought to maintain diplomatic composure. Jake cleared his throat. I appreciate you traveling all this way to meet with us, Commander Vex'thor. Would you and your colleagues like some coffee? Or perhaps some, plant food? The last part slipped out before Jake could stop himself, and several other diplomats in the room made choking sounds as they tried not to laugh out loud. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the xenobiologist who had been called in to study the aliens, wasn't even trying to hide her delight. She sat in the corner frantically scribbling notes while barely containing her glee. Fascinating, she whispered to her recorder. The lead specimen appears to be some sort of mobile succulent. Note the defensive spikes and the mottled green coloration typically associated with drought-resistant plant life. Sub-Commander Krill attempted to help by demonstrating his species' intimidation display, extending all 12 tentacles to their full length and making what he thought were terrifying hissing sounds. Instead, he looked like an enthusiastic car wash and sounded like a leaky tire. A junior diplomat in the back row whispered, "Does anyone else think he looks like he's trying to give everyone a group hug?" This was when Battle Specialist Thunk decided to step in. He strode forward, his 4 massive arms spread wide, and let out what was supposed to be a bone-chilling war cry. Instead, it came out as a sound remarkably similar to a cow with indigestion, which sent several diplomats into barely suppressed fits of giggles. Technical Officer Qrix, desperate to restore their intimidating image, began breathing larger flames and making complex gestures with his clawed hands. The humans watched with fascination rather than fear. "Oh wow," Dr. Vasquez breathed. "It's like a reptilian interpretive dance. Are those threat displays, or is he trying to communicate through movement? This is incredible." Jake Morrison was now fighting a losing battle with his composure. Every time he looked at the alien delegation, he saw what appeared to be an angry salad, a confused octopus, a constipated rhinoceros, and an overly dramatic lizard trying their absolute best to be scary and failing spectacularly. "Commander," Jake managed, his voice slightly strained, "perhaps we could discuss the terms of this submission over lunch. I'm sure we can work something out that's mutually beneficial." Vex'thor's intimidating posture deflated slightly. In all his years of diplomatic intimidation, he had never encountered a species that responded to threats by offering food and trying not to giggle. The humans weren't cowering, they weren't surrendering, and they definitely weren't taking the Galactic Dominion seriously. "Are you not terrified of our superior technology and overwhelming military might?" Vex'thor asked, genuinely confused. Jake looked around the room at his fellow diplomats, all of whom were red-faced from suppressed laughter, then back at the alien delegation that looked like refugees from a garden center's nightmare. "Well," Jake said diplomatically, "you're certainly very unique." Dr. Vasquez chose that moment to approach with her tablet, addressing Vex'thor directly. "Excuse me, but would you mind if I took some measurements? For scientific purposes, of course. I'm particularly interested in your photosynthetic processes and root system." Vex'thor stared at her in disbelief. This tiny human female was treating him like a botanical specimen rather than a terrifying representative of galactic conquest. For the first time in Dominion history, their elite diplomatic team was experiencing something completely unprecedented, being adorable instead of terrifying. The breakthrough came 3 hours later when Technical Officer Qrix accidentally hit the wrong button on his universal translator while trying to record the human's strange behavior for the Dominion archives. Instead of recording, he activated the translation history log, which immediately began playing back every single human transmission the Dominion had intercepted over the past 50 years. "Wait," Jake Morrison said. Looking up from his 3rd cup of coffee, "You've been listening to our broadcasts." Qrix's translator crackled to life, and suddenly the room was filled with audio clips from Earth's greatest hits, sitcom laugh tracks, stand-up comedy routines, reality TV show arguments, and what appeared to be something called the Three Stooges. Commander Vex'thor's face went from mottled green to pale yellow. "Qrix, turn that off immediately." But it was too late. Dr. Vasquez had grabbed the device and was scrolling through the translation logs with the enthusiasm of a scientist who had just discovered a new species. "Oh my God," she said. her eyes widening. You guys thought our TV shows were military broadcasts, didn't you? The room fell silent except for the continued playback of what sounded like a Jerry Seinfeld routine being translated into formal Dominion military terminology. According to our intelligence, Sub-Commander Krill said defensively, your species regularly engages in psychological warfare tactics designed to break the minds of your enemies. We intercepted hundreds of these weapons of mental destruction. Jake Morrison set down his coffee cup very carefully. The weapons of mental destruction? Yes, Vex'thor exclaimed, pointing at the translator. Your situation comedies, as you call them. I analyzed them extensively. The repetitive audio assault designed to trigger involuntary neural responses in your victims. The psychological manipulation techniques. The way you mock and demean your enemies until they break down completely. Dr. Vasquez stared at him. You mean laugh tracks? And your stand-up comedy, Krill continued, his tentacles waving agitatedly. Clearly advanced interrogation techniques designed to disorient and confuse prisoners of war through nonsensical scenarios and deliberate logical inconsistencies. You thought comedy was torture? Jake asked weakly. Technical Officer Qrix pulled up another file. And don't get us started on your reality television programs. The psychological manipulation, the emotional warfare, the way you pit individuals against each other for the entertainment of others. We've never seen such sophisticated methods of mental cruelty. The translator continued playing clips, and suddenly everything made horrible, hilarious sense. The Galactic Dominion had spent decades analyzing human entertainment as if it were military intelligence. They'd studied comedy specials like battle plans, sitcoms like psychological warfare manuals, and reality TV like advanced torture techniques. So when you intercepted friends, Dr. Vasquez said slowly, you thought it was a documentary about human military units practicing psychological manipulation. The way they constantly mocked each other and yet remained in close proximity. Vex'thor nodded gravely. We assumed it was advanced conditioning to create soldiers immune to mental breakdown. Jake Morrison put his head in his hands. And America's funniest home videos. Evidence of your species' cruelty toward your own offspring and domestic animals. Battle Specialist Thunk rumbled. We were horrified by the systematic documentation of inflicting pain for the amusement of others. The room was quiet for a long moment as the full scope of the misunderstanding became clear. The most feared military alliance in 17 galaxies had been terrified of humanity because they thought sitcoms were weapons of mass destruction. So, Jake said finally, let me get this straight. The entire Galactic Dominion has been afraid to contact Earth because they thought we were a species of psychopathic comedians who used humor as a form of biological warfare. Not just afraid, Qrix admitted quietly. The High Council classified humans as a level Omega threat. That's the same classification we use for species that can destroy entire star systems. Dr. Vasquez looked at her notes, then at the alien delegation, then back at her notes. You came here expecting to find a planet full of comedy weapon-wielding monsters, and instead you found us laughing at you because you look like garden vegetables. The irony was so perfect that even the aliens were beginning to understand why humans found it amusing. In our defense, Vex'thor said weakly, your species does appear to use humor as a social bonding mechanism with frightening efficiency. Well, Jake grinned. You're not wrong about that. Once the misunderstanding was cleared up, Jake Morrison found himself in the unique position of having to explain human humor to a group of aliens who had never experienced laughter in their entire lives. It was like trying to describe color to someone who had been blind since birth, except somehow more complicated. Okay, Jake said, loosening his tie. Let me show you what we're actually dealing with here. He pulled out his phone, and within minutes had organized what would go down in history as the first interspecies comedy show. Word spread quickly through the UN building, and soon the main assembly hall was packed with diplomats, staff members, and anyone else who could sneak in to watch humanity attempt to make aliens laugh. Dr. Vasquez set up recording equipment while practically vibrating with scientific excitement. This is unprecedented, she whispered to her colleagues. We're about to witness the first cross-species humor exchange in recorded history. Jake started simple. Why don't scientists trust atoms? He asked the alien delegation, who looked at him with the intense focus of scholars preparing for an exam. We do not know, Commander Vex'thor replied seriously. Are atoms known for deceptive behavior in human culture? Because they make up everything. Jake delivered the punchline. The aliens stared at him blankly. You see, Jake explained, atoms literally make up everything, as in they compose all matter, but make up also means to lie or fabricate stories. Technical Officer Qrix's head tilted almost 90 degrees. So you have created a linguistic paradox for the purpose of, what exactly? Amusement, Jake said. It's funny because of the double meaning. But why is creating confusion amusing? Sub-Commander Krill asked, his tentacles curling in what Dr. Vasquez was beginning to recognize as his thinking pose. This was going to be harder than Jake thought. And he tried a different approach. Okay, let's try physical comedy. He pulled up a video of people slipping on banana peels. Battle Specialist Thunk watched intently as human after human lost their footing and fell down. This appears to be documentation of humans experiencing loss of motor control due to fruit-based obstacles. Is this a common cause of injury on your planet? No, Jake said. It's funny because it's unexpected, and the people aren't seriously hurt. You find the temporary loss of dignity amusing? Vex'thor asked, making notes on his own device. Well, when you put it like that, it sounds kind of cruel, Jake admitted. Dr. Vasquez stepped in. Maybe I can explain the biological component. When humans laugh, our brains release endorphins, which are natural feel-good chemicals. Laughter actually has measurable health benefits. It reduces stress, boosts our immune system, and helps us bond with other humans. She pulled up brain scans on her tablet. I see these neural pathways lighting up. That's the humor response triggering multiple positive reactions throughout the human body. The aliens leaned in to study the scans with fascination. So humor is a form of biological self-medication? Qrix asked. Yeah, and social bonding mechanism, Dr. Vasquez confirmed. When humans laugh together, it creates trust and strengthens relationships. The Commander Vex'thor straightened up suddenly. Are you saying that your species has evolved a biological mechanism that provides both individual health benefits and social cohesion through the processing of paradox and unexpected events? Yeah, basically, Jake said. The aliens exchanged looks that seemed to communicate entire conversations. That is terrifying, Vex'thor said quietly. What? Why? Because it means your species has weaponized joy itself. Jake blinked. I mean, I guess if you want to think about it that way. Sub-Commander Krill's tentacles began writhing faster. And you deploy this biological warfare constantly, without conscious thought, as a natural response to your environment. We're just having fun, Jake protested. Fun. Battle Specialist Thunk repeated slowly, as if tasting the word, in a state of voluntary psychological manipulation that improves physical health and social bonds. Dr. Vasquez was scribbling notes frantically. They're not wrong, she muttered. When you analyze it objectively, human humor really is an incredibly sophisticated biological and social tool. Jake looked around the room at all the humans who had gathered to watch, all of whom were grinning and chuckling at the aliens' analysis of their own laughter. Okay, Jake said. But here's the thing, you want to try it? And that's when everything changed. Commander Vex'thor's report to the Dominion High Council was, by all accounts, the most disturbing intelligence briefing in galactic history. Let me understand this correctly, High Councillor Zephyran said, his voice crackling through the quantum communicator. You're telling me that the humans have developed a biological weapon that makes its targets experience involuntary pleasure while simultaneously strengthening social bonds and improving physical health? That's correct, sir, Vex'thor replied, trying to keep his own voice steady. The problem was, he'd spent the last 6 hours learning human jokes, and he was starting to understand why they found everything so amusing. It was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain his serious military demeanor. And this weapon requires no technology, no training, and can be deployed by any member of their species at any time. Sir, they call it humor, and yes, even their smallest offspring appear to be naturally equipped with it. There was a long pause. In the background, Vex'thor could hear the emergency session bells ringing on the High Council station. "Hey, Commander, you need to return immediately. We're calling a full Dominion assembly. If this species has developed some sort of bioweapon that spreads joy and social cohesion, we need to understand the implications for galactic security." "Actually, sir," Vex'thor said, "there's something else. What could possibly be worse than joy-based biological warfare?" Vex'thor looked around the UN conference room, where his crew was still learning knock-knock jokes from a group of human diplomats. Technical Officer Qrix had just figured out the "orange you glad I didn't say banana" punchline and was making a sound that could only be described as mechanical wheezing. "Sir, I think they got us." "What do you mean they got you, Commander?" "I mean we're infected, sir. We've been exposed to human humor for approximately 7 hours, and I believe we're beginning to experience the early stages of this laughter response they've weaponized." The silence on the other end of the communicator was deafening. "Sir," Commander Vex'thor, "you are hereby ordered to maintain strict quarantine protocols. Do not, under any circumstances, allow this infection to spread to other Dominion personnel. We're sending a containment fleet immediately." "Sir, with respect, I don't think containment is going to work." "Why not?" Vex'thor watched as Jake Morrison taught Battle Specialist Thunk how to make finger guns while saying "hey there," sport in what humans apparently called a dad voice. Thunk was practicing the gesture with all 4 of his massive arms while making a rumbling sound that might have been laughter. "Because, sir, it's actually kind of nice." The quantum communicator went dead. Within hours, news of the humor infection had spread throughout Dominion space. Emergency councils were called, quarantine protocols were established, and for the first time in galactic history, an entire military alliance was mobilizing against the threat of feeling good. But word was also spreading through unofficial channels. Stories of the strange human ability to create joy were being shared in bars, trading posts, and space stations across 17 galaxies. Species that had been conquered by the Dominion centuries ago began to whisper about a planet where beings had learned to turn suffering into laughter. The first non-Dominion ships arrived at Earth within a week. The Melancholy Collective, a species that had been clinically depressed for over 1,000 years, sent a delegation requesting asylum. The Anxiety Federation transmitted a formal request for humanitarian aid. The perpetually grumpy Union asked if Earth would consider establishing an embassy in their territory. Jake Morrison found himself appointed as humanity's first galactic comedy ambassador, a job title that would have been unthinkable a month earlier. "So let me get this straight," he said to Dr. Vasquez as they watched another ship full of deeply serious aliens land in Central Park. "We accidentally conquered the galaxy by making everyone laugh?" "Technically," Dr. Vasquez replied, checking her notes, "I think we liberated it." In the distance, they could see Commander Vex'thor teaching a group of recently arrived aliens how to play charades, while Sub-Commander Krill led another group through what appeared to be an enthusiastic round of the hokey pokey. "Same difference," Jake grinned. 6 months later, Earth had become something no one could have predicted, the galaxy's premier entertainment destination. What had started as a diplomatic incident had evolved into the most successful cultural exchange in cosmic history. Jake Morrison, now officially titled Galactic Comedy Ambassador, stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Intergalactic Humor Institute, Sci-Fi, watching ships from hundreds of different species arrive daily. The former UN quarters had been expanded into a sprawling complex that included comedy clubs, laughter therapy centers, and something called the Universal Joke Database. "You know," he said to Dr. Vasquez, who had become the Institute's chief science officer, "I never imagined I'd be running a galactic comedy empire." "Empire is a strong word," she replied, looking up from her latest research paper titled The Neurobiological Effects of Cross-Species Pun Appreciation. "I prefer to think of it as a therapeutic democracy." The transformation had been remarkable. Commander Vex'thor now ran weekend workshops on intimidation to entertainment, a military leader's guide to comedy. His former crew had become Earth's most popular alien comedy troupe, with Sub-Commander Krill's tentacle-based physical comedy drawing audiences from across the galaxy. The Dominion itself had undergone a complete restructuring. What had once been a military alliance focused on conquest had become something called the Galactic Happiness Collective, dedicated to spreading joy and laughter throughout the universe. Their former war fleets now served as traveling comedy shows, bringing humor to the farthest reaches of space. But perhaps the most significant change was in how the galaxy understood itself. Species that had been enemies for millennia discovered they could laugh together. Trade disputes were settled through comedy competitions, but diplomatic negotiations now included mandatory humor breaks. Ambassador Morrison came a familiar voice behind them. Jake turned to see Technical Officer Qrix approaching. Though he now preferred to be called Comedian Qrix, and had developed a surprisingly good routine about the difficulties of breathing fire in space. "The High Council is requesting another demonstration," Qrix said, holding up a communication device. "Apparently there's a species in the Andromeda galaxy that's been at war with itself for 3,000 years, and they want to see if humor might help." Another day, another cosmic crisis solved by dad jokes, Jake sighed. "What's the species called?" "The Eternally Furious Federation." Dr. Vasquez looked up from her research. "Oh, this should be good. What's their primary conflict about?" Qrix consulted his notes. They'd been fighting over the correct pronunciation of their species' name for 3 millennia. Jake and Dr. Vasquez exchanged glances. "Yeah, we can probably help with that," Jake said. As they prepared for another interplanetary comedy intervention, Jake reflected on how much had changed. Humanity had set out to make first contact and ended up accidentally becoming the galaxy's therapists. They'd weaponized laughter without meaning to, conquered through kindness without trying, and somehow managed to bring peace to the universe by making everyone giggle. There was just one problem. "Ambassador," Dr. Vasquez said quietly, "we need to talk about the latest intelligence reports." "What now?" "Well, it seems that news of our success has reached other dimensions, and there's a concerning development." Jake raised an eyebrow. "More concerning than accidentally conquering the galaxy through comedy." "The reports suggest that there's a parallel universe where Earth develops stand-up comedy to an even more advanced level, and they're apparently planning to invade our dimension through something they call meta-humor." Jake stared at her. "Meta-humor? Jokes about jokes about jokes. Humor so advanced that it creates recursive laughter loops. And they want to invade us. According to the intelligence, they're calling it the Great Punchline War." Jake Morrison, Galactic Comedy Ambassador and accidental conqueror of 17 galaxies, sat down heavily in his chair. "You know what?" he said finally. "I'm not even surprised anymore. At this point, I'm just impressed that we haven't been invaded by a dimension where everyone communicates entirely through knock-knock jokes." Dr. Vasquez's communicator beeped. She looked at it, then at Jake, then back at it. "About that." And somewhere in Central Park, Commander Vex'thor was teaching a group of kindergartners how to make alien sounds, completely unaware that the next phase of humanity's accidental cosmic domination was about to begin with a 5-year-old asking, "Knock knock, who's there, Mr. Plant Man?" The galaxy would never be the same.